In order to know where we're going, we need to acknowledge where we've been. The Mana series is a franchise of action RPGs with varying critical successes and acclaim, ranging from some of the best and most influential to lackluster and forgettable spin-offs. They're not perfect, but they all have a certain charm about them that makes them distinctly Mana. Many of the Mana games do not have stories with strong character development or even very strong narratives, as they largely focus on the gameplay. But there are a few that do, and one in particular that gets a bad reputation is the last mainline Mana game that was released before Visions, Dawn of Mana, released in 2006. This is a retrospective of a truly unique, if not misguided, gem from the PS2 era. I can confidently say that no game that I have ever played was more in need of a remake, and I'll explain why. This game is full of good intentions with bad execution, and the fact that I may have enjoyed the game does not change the truth of this fact, but it has the potential to be great. The focus of the first half of this retrospective is going to be on the story of Dawn of Mana, and the second half will be on the gameplay and everything else connected. This will be chaptered below for ease of use. As I played through this to whet my appetite for Visions, I found myself charmed by the art style, the setting, and the gameplay. Yeah, the gameplay. But what stuck out to me the most was the characters, particularly Keldric and Ritzia, our protagonist and deuteragonist. This was brought to life by the voice acting performances, which, despite its age, was considerably better than the most recent titles, the Trials and Secret of Mana remakes. Now, this is not a particularly impressive feat. Hell, the Trials of Mana remake has some of the worst voice acting I've ever heard in a game. But many PS2 JRPGs had not really figured out voice acting quite to the degree that this game did. And this really helped bring the slightly above average story to life. But the story still mostly misses due to the way that it's told. Why this story is important is that it sets up the mythos for all of the Mana games. I'm going to dive into the narrative of this game so you don't have to, as I would never recommend playing this game in its current state. I'll speak on the missteps that this game took, as well as things I would love to see return in Visions of Mana or future Mana titles as well. Let's jump into it. I'm Solace, this is Solace and Dread. We produced nuanced discussions and analytical content primarily focused on gaming. If you like that kind of stuff, consider subscribing and hit the like button to let YouTube know it too. The story kicks off with the elemental spirits of the world meeting to discuss the link between them and humanity, as well as the origin story of the Mana Tree, thousands of years in the past. They introduce you to the 8 spirits that will be present to help you throughout the course of your journey. They also introduce the layout of the world and the nations, noting that a great and towering Mana Tree rested on a small island in the center of the world, which had been there since time immemorial, but the mana from that tree had long ago been drained. It has since turned to stone, and the elemental spirits and mana were gone from the world. Still, no one dared go near in fear of the sacred beast that was rumored to protect the island, but that was about to change. The prologue, More Than Friends. The scene cuts to our protagonist and deuteragonist, Keldric and Ritzia. They're 2 of the tree folk that lived in a small village near the base of the great tree. We're thrown into a scenario where you, as Keldric, need to chase down Ritzia's pet rabbit, Puju. This serves as the game's tutorial area. Once you catch him, you find yourselves in a forest dwelling, where it's explained that Ritzia and Keldric have been more than close friends since childhood, finding a tree where he had carved their initials into it in their youth. It's established right away that these 2 are close, lifelong companions, as even the feather that Keldric dons in his hair was given to him by Ritzia. This feather happened to be from the sacred beast from the legends. While standing near the tree, in the distance they hear military marching, and they run to investigate. They come upon a scene of an army of golems marching toward their village. These were soldiers from the icy region of Lorimar. This was unheard of in this small peaceful island, where outside nations never dare set foot. The king of Lorimar and leader of their forces, Stroud, rounded all of the villagers up in captivity. Needing to combat this unknown foe, Keldric and Ritzia run to awaken the guardian beast of legend that protected their island. It was believed to be slumbering beneath the great tree. Chapter 1: A Spirit and a Maiden. In their rush to the tree, they find that soldiers had already beaten them there, as they were in search of the beast to kill it, before it could kill them. Sneaking past the soldiers, they went into the depths of the tree to look for the sacred beast. Wandering into the depths of the tree, the pair finds a sealed door. Next to the door, on the ground, is a large seed. Keldric, in his bold curiosity, wrenches the seed from its resting place, at which point it begins to shine a brilliant light, then grow and latch onto his body in a burst of twisting vines around his arm. Keldric finds his arm irreversibly wrapped with these vines, and has the ability to summon a blade to his right hand, seemingly made from the tree. From this point on, we'll be referring to his sword as the Tree Blade. It's not really what it's called, but we're gonna call it the Tree Blade. It's obviously the Tree Blade. Afraid of his new predicament, he and Ritzia resolve to head back to town to try to talk to the Elder to understand what has become of him, but that would need to wait until after releasing the Guardian Beast. Beyond this, he now has the ability to throw out latching whips of vines to manipulate and toss objects around him in combat. He can also wield vines like a slingshot to fire pellets at foes from afar. He and Ritzia, for some reason, can now hear the voices of the elementals whispering to them. They say that one of them is the tree's chosen one, and the tree will awaken again. As they travel deeper into the tree, they come to a clearing where swirling elemental lights combine and birth a fairy named Faye. Faye follows along as you travel through the tree, and as it turns out, she's able to utilize the magic of the elementals to aid in combat. Keldric and Faye get to know one another along the way, and he reveals to Faye that he's not originally from the village of Treefolk, but he's been in their care since he was a child. As they reach the inner sanctum of the tree, they find a beast, but not the beast that they're looking for. The beast tells them things that they don't understand, such as not to release the echoes and that something has been sealed here for 1,000 years, but they pay it no mind, as they need to kill the beast that's threatening to kill them. After the battle, as they're getting their bearings, a woman's voice calls to Ritzia and compels her to touch the roots of the great tree. And she does, at which point a dark portal opens, and the voice says the promises of old shall be fulfilled. At this point, Ritzia's fate has already been sealed, and they don't even know it yet. This encounter leaves Ritzia unconscious, and Keldric sees the Golem army has caught up with them to surround them in the distraction. Outside, after Ritzia touched the roots, the tree shone forth a brilliant light. This sight had the tree folk trembling in fear, but this was only of amusement to their captor, King Stroud. Stroud commands that a group of the captured villagers be taken to the base of the great tree, including the village elder, Keldric, and Keldric's best friend Lechius, the guardian of the village. Stroud questions the group on how to open the door to Mavolia. Lechius, confused, repeats this back to him for clarity. Stroud goes on to explain that their entire island is a door to a place called Mavolia, and it is a curse that has been sealed for 1,000 years. Lechius fires back that Alusia is a holy place and a sanctuary, not understanding the strange musings of the Mad King. The village elder presses Stroud on his goal, to which he replies that his goal is to take the power of Mavolia for his own. The elder advises that in his action, the world would be consumed by Thanatos and plunged into eternal darkness. Stroud is indifferent, threatening to torture Ritzia until they reveal how to open the door. Keldric explodes in anger upon hearing this, drawing his tree blade against Stroud, but is easily overpowered. In an effort to protect Ritzia, the village elder reveals the location of the key to open the door to Mavolia, a forest called Wonderwood. Stroud laughs and orders them to be taken away. Stroud mentions to his masked comrade that he knows that Keldric is not a tree folk. They make note that Keldric is worth keeping an eye on. Chapter 2, Lord of the Forest. At the Wonderwood, the Golem army has Ritzia and plans to use her as a guide to find the key to Mavolia. Lechius and Keldric, having escaped their captors, plan to follow them and save Ritzia. Keldric tells Lechius that he needs to go back and protect the villagers, and he would save Ritzia alone. Lechius agrees, telling him they would be counting on him. Little did he know that this would be one of the last times he ever saw his best friend. Keldric and Faye battle their way to the heart of the forest. During their travel, Keldric confides in Faye that he'd never been there before, as he was always forbidden to go. Moments later, a creature called a Chobanhood approaches, saying that Treant, a guardian of nature and a recurring character in the Mana series, would like to speak with them. The pair follow Chobi to the Treant's lair. In such, they find Ritzia speaking with Treant, who's in the midst of explaining what the echoes of destruction are, the same echoes mentioned by the beast at the roots of the great tree. The echoes, according to the sentient tree, are reverberations from the darkest corners of the human heart. Treant, noticing the party, adds that 1,000 years ago, a young lady opened the door to Mavolia, and that others are trying to open it again. But he confidently says that as long as he lives, he is able to contain the evil power within, and the door will never be opened. But just then, that evil power within, an evil sword inside of him, reacts to the echoes touched by Ritzia from the great tree's roots, and Treant is quickly corrupted, saying the doors will inevitably be opened. With no other option but to kill the Treant, Keldric battles into eventual success. Having been defeated, Treant spits out the corrupted sword, and in desperation, the dying Treant pleads with Ritzia to travel to Mortmont to find the sacred beast and seek his help. Before they can leave, the masked comrade of Shroud reappears, taking the sword that resided within Treant, and says that he intends to capture Keldric and Ritzia. Ritzia stands between Keldric and the masked guru, sacrificing herself to capture. The masked guru sends his dragon to follow Keldric, as he believes he knows where he's headed next. Meanwhile, the news of what was happening on Elusia had reached the outside world, and the leaders of other nations met to discuss the situation on the island and the actions of King Shroud. But they were unwilling to stand against the terrible might of Lorabar and couldn't come to a consensus on how to help. Chapter 3, The Guardian and Gaia. Having arrived to Mortmont, Keldric and Faye battled their way to the top of the mountain, as Loramarian forces had already beaten them there. Upon reaching the summit, Keldric decides to take a rest in a seemingly uninhabited area. Just then, a giant rock slide breaks the silence, and it's revealed to be Gaia, the face of Earth, and another recurring character in the Mana series, in the same vein as Treant. He tells the party that he's been waiting for them, and he is also aware of the Thanatos that felled Treant. Gaia explains to Keldric that Thanatos are spirits born from the echoes that slumber deep beneath the Mana Tree, the very same echoes that Ritzia encountered. They have the potential to flood the world with darkness if unhindered, but if the light pierces them through prayers, the great tree will herald a new age. He then speaks directly to Faye by telling her that she is the link that brings humans and elemental spirits together, but there will come a day where she wants to make her own decisions about what to do. Keldric asks about the sacred beast that they came there to ask the assistance of. Gaia explains that the sacred beast, Flammy, came to him a millennia ago, injured and seeking shelter. Just then, they're interrupted by the dragon of the masked guru, who'd been following them since he left the forest. They battled the wyvern to defeat, enlisting Gaia to aid in their quest however he can. After the battle, the masked guru and Shroud rain cannon fire upon where the group was standing. But the ground is then torn apart, and Flammy emerges from beneath, saving Keldric and Faye. The party takes off in flight to try to save the world. First, they go to the village of the tree folk and begin driving the occupying golem army out with force by the sheer might of Flammy. The forces of Lorimar retreat to the coast and their homeward-bound ships. Keldric returns to the village and is greeted as a hero, but this victory was short-lived, as he still did not have Ritzia. He knew he needed to save her before they were too far out of his reach, so he heads to the nearby coast to try to rescue Ritzia once again. Chapter 4. Ritzia. Keldric and Faye battle their way up the coast and sneak aboard the vessel they believe Ritzia is being held captive on, before it's too late. As they battle through the ship, the masked guru confronts them and tells Keldric that his presence was inevitable, just the same as his role in opening the door to Mavolia is as well. The same plot has already unfolded 1,000 years prior. Keldric demands to know the story of what happened back then. The guru indulges. He tells him that a tree maiden was possessed by the echoes and opened the door, revealing her name as Anise. Anise's conscience won out, and she sealed the door shut again with the assistance of an unnamed young man. But he insists that this time, the door will stay open, thanks to Ritzia. Keldric fires back that Ritzia would never help him. The masked guru calls his bluff and tells him where Ritzia is, daring him to talk her out of it, then leaves. Eventually reaching the hold where Ritzia is, Keldric frees her. However, Faye notices something appears strange. She's in a catatonic state, whispering about echoes, Mavolia, and the events of 1,000 years ago. She's unsure of who she is or what's happening to her. Keldric resolves to lead her out of the ship in an attempt to save her from her current state. Reaching the deck of the ship, King Stroud laid waiting in ambush and decides to test Keldric in his tree blade's strength in combat. Keldric, having bested Stroud in combat, learns that he plans to attack his village tomorrow. Stroud tells Keldric to help them, or he will kill him where he stands, lunging for a final blow at Keldric. Keldric pushed back, now shining with the light from the tree blade, and unveiling previously unknown power. Stroud's forces turn 2 cannons toward him and blow him from the side of the ship. The ordeal has snapped Ritzia out of her catatonic state, and she pleads for Stroud to spare Keldric's life. Seeing Keldric's light in the water, Stroud ignores Ritzia and orders them to extinguish him in totality as they bombard the water. Faye uses her power to protect Keldric, but soon the light in the water goes dim. Ritzia screams in horror, assuming she just witnessed the death of her best friend. Keldric awakes the next day on the shore with Faye and thanks her for saving him, but Faye can't remember how she saved him. They hear the assault on the village in the distance and run toward the sound of the battle. Back at the village, a full battle has ensued between the golem army and the tree folk, with Flammy doing his best to lend his assistance from the sky. It's all-out warfare in the once peaceful village. While the tree folk, Lechius and Flammy, are able to slow them down, eventually Flammy is injured. Suddenly, as Lechius is about to face certain death, Watts, the leader of one of the outside nations, appears in a tank to save him. Finally, it appears that someone from the outside world has stepped up to help the people of the island stand against the Mad King Stroud. He advises that the people of the village need to flee to regroup, and Flammy, having shaken off the injury, aids them in covering their retreat. However, despite their efforts to regroup and re-strategize, Stroud corners them in front of the sealed door to Mavolia. Ritzia tells them to lay down their arms and stop resisting Shroud to spare their lives. Stroud promises them that the mana tree will be rejuvenated and that everything will have eternal life. The village elder asks why they would ever want this for themselves, but Stroud tells them that Ritzia is sold on the idea as well. The elder presses, saying that their ancestors have only claimed that darkness lies beyond that door and nothing else, asking if she's sure about this. Ritzia persists, saying that light cannot exist without darkness. Hearing this, the elder stands down, vowing not to interfere. Lechius stands firm, reminding her of Keldric's efforts to resist Lorimar and save her, but she relays to the group the news of Keldric's death. With the group reeling, Ritzia presses past the crowd and begins the ritual to open the door. The mana tree awakens, shining with brilliant light for the first time in a millennia. but only for a moment, as darkness and the echoes of Mavolia pour out into the world. Everyone in the near vicinity is possessed and drowns in the black light of Mavolia. Stroud takes his newfound power into his clutches and has become Mavol, master of the New World Order, turning everyone the black light touches into Grimsleys, slaves bent to his will. Just then, Keldric reaches the door, seemingly unaffected by the echoes, demanding to know where Ritzia is. Stroud brandishes his newfound power against the tree blade and easily overpowers Keldric, demonstrating a new level of strength. As Stroud advances, Faye protects Keldric from a mortal blow. Watts rushes in to escort them to safety in his tank. As Stroud chases them out, the masked guru approaches the door to Mavolia, welcoming a mutated, womanly figure. We then see our heroes out at sea, Keldric watching over his unconscious fairy friend, who protected him with unknown power. But this would be too little too late, as this was the beginning of the end of the world.
Hi. Some of the terminology for the antagonist and how it works is a little bit muddy, so let me give a quick refresher on how all of this works. And by the way, you're this far into the video. Surely you've hit the like button already, right? Anyway, let's jump into it.
All right, so here's the world, right? And then in the center of the world is the tree. Big, fluffy tree, right? All the roots go into the ground, under all the people, okay? And then there's the men of the world, right? Evil men, right? And then the men, they speak and do evil, right? But the tree hears all of that. The tree knows, okay? So all of the evil things from men go into the ground. They go into the tree and are kept inside of the base of the tree, filled with evil energy. These are the reverberations of men. These are the echoes of Mavolia, right? Evil energy here, right? So these are the echoes of Mavolia, echoes of destruction. They actually have a destructive property to them. The Thanatos, right? Let's pick a new color for the Thanatos, right? We'll go dark purple, right? So the Thanatos is once the door to Mavolia is open, okay? This is all kept in a door. Once the door to Mavolia is open, the Thanatos is the evil spirits that pop out, born from the echoes, right? This is Thanatos. And what Thanatos can do is Thanatos, if it reaches a man, right? All of a sudden, he is now a Grimsley. So he is now under the control of whoever controls the Thanatos, whoever that person is, whoever opened the door. In this case, it is Stroud. So to recap, there's the echoes, there's the Thanatos, and then the Grimsleys. The echoes, the Thanatos, and the Grimsleys. That's it. Easy lesson. All right, let's get back into the video. Chapter 5 of Deserts and Friends. It's been a whole year since Ritzia opened that portal to Mavolia, allowing the world to be overrun by Thanatos, and making its inhabitants turn into mindless Grimsleys. The possessed roamed the world, hunting for the surviving human resistance. Keldric and Watts also try to find survivors themselves, trying to bolster their forces to mount a counterattack. Their journey leads them to a palace in a place called Jad, where people have banded together to try to survive. As they push through the palace, Faye and Keldric discuss the plan to change the world back to the way it was, as she had fears about going back to Elusia, unsure of how to close the door to Mavolia. Keldric says that he wants to ask Ritzia why she opened the door in the first place, convinced that meeting with her could bring resolution and close the door. Reaching the innermost sanctum of the palace, Keldric is confronted by his best friend Lechius, but he's now mutated and under the control of Stroud. Lechius tries to persuade Keldric to join the ranks of the Grimsleys, promising no hunger, aging, or even death. Keldric remains steadfast and refuses Thanatos. Seeing this, Lechius reveals his mission is to bring the seed of the Mana Tree back to Elusia, even if it means killing Keldric. The two engage in a tragic battle, and Keldric is left with no choice but to kill his friend. As Keldric watches his friend begin to pass away, Lechius tells him that in 3 days Ritzia will free the echoes of destruction upon the world, since they still remain within the Great Tree. Keldric grieves the loss of his best friend and what he just had to do. The voices of Gaia and Treant enter Keldric's mind and urge him not to give up hope. With his mind set on returning to Elusia, Keldric asks Watts to meet with him in Jad. Keldric warns Watts of the echoes of destruction coming in 3 days. Watts advises Keldric that if he means to storm Elusia, there's a device atop a tower there that can weaken the power of Thanatos, giving him a fighting chance and allowing for reinforcements to follow without getting possessed. By the way, this is the single worst plot point of the game. There's just this random device that's on top of a tower that just happens to fix the single worst problem. Anyway, Chapter 6, A Fool and a Sword. Keldric and Faye crash their ship on Elusia. Keldric finds himself in a dream state where Ritzia tries to persuade him to join the Thanatos. Keldric remains strong and resists Ritzia. She remarks that he still clings to the tree blade, and if he were to cut her down with it, the future may turn out differently. The possibility of what he might have to do first crosses his mind, and he flees from the dream state, still reeling from the wound of having to kill Lechius. Keldric now sets out to ascend the tower and activate the device that could weaken the Thanatos and Lorimarian army so that the resistance could mount a counterattack. After a long, winding race to the summit, Keldric and Faye successfully activate the tower's mechanism, shining a bright light over their heads. Just as they go to signal to Watts and the resistance, the masked guru confronts them, advising that he doesn't believe that Keldric will succeed in his efforts. He reveals that he's not a human or a Grimsley, but a man burdened with the knowledge of a millennia, and he's willing to help if Keldric can pass his test of trial by combat, assuaging his doubts. After a long and arduous battle, Keldric emerges victorious. After a final strike against the Guru, the tree blade's light shines forth brilliantly, and he begins to share more about who he is. He reveals that he awoke from 1,000-year sleep when Keldric was brought to the island, and he was Anissa's lover, the original Tree Maiden, and the one who sealed her away. He was trying to save her from what she had become. He too had given birth to a sacred sword, much like Keldric's, but with Anisse, the sword was corrupted. It's the same sword that Stroud now proudly bears. He assures Keldric that his sword is different from Stroud's, as it was missing something, but whatever was missing before is present now. That missing element would turn out to be the light and the spirit of both Keldric and Faye. He then reveals that the Mad King Stroud is Keldric's brother, urging him to go to him just before vanishing into death. The light that Keldric activated weakened the Thanatos long enough for Watts and his patchwork army to make landfall. The final battle for the will of the world was set in motion. Chapter 7, Warriors of Hope. The army storms the road to Keldric's former village, supporting Watts in an upgraded version of his tank. Destroying enemy artillery and battling enemy units navigating the tough terrain, they finally make their way to the caves below the Great Tree. Watts parts ways as he opts to stay behind and stall the oncoming enemy forces. Keldric proceeds forward to be greeted by Grim Golem Generalissimo, one of the leaders of Stroud's forces. After Keldric makes quick work of him, seriously, he's a really easy fight. In a last-ditch effort to help Stroud, the general blows up his tank in an act of suicide, effectively blocking the entrance to the caves. Seemingly unable to assail the caves, Flammy suddenly appears above them and offers giving a lift to the entrance of the castle that now resides at the tree's top. Flammy effortlessly weaves by the enemy's attacks and drops Keldric off at the front of the building. Chapter 8, The Great Tree. Now at the final confrontation, Keldric battles through hordes of King Stroud's armies toward the center of the tree, aiming to find his lost friend and confronts Stroud. Keldric finally confronts his brother, demanding to see Ritzia. Before him appears a mutated version of Ritzia, silent and pensive. This is actually Anise, having possessed Ritzia's body. But Keldric was unaware. The Mad King taunts Keldric, telling him that he should have disposed of him properly when he was a baby, seeing that he has somehow survived his efforts in tossing him out to sea. He says that he believes he can settle their difference amicably, but not before getting rid of some dead weight, then immediately running his blade through the back of Ritzia. Ritzia falls, Keldric catching her, pleading for her to hold on as she begins to fade. Stroud waited for Keldric to bear witness before killing Ritzia, as he knew the treachery residing within Ritzia. He knew that she wanted Keldric to defeat him and take his place, as well as her plot to release the echoes of destruction in 3 days. Stroud and Keldric cross swords in contest once again, this time with Stroud at the height of his power. Somehow, Keldric still succeeds in combat. Even as he dies, Stroud taunts Keldric, reminding him that, the world aside, his true goal was to save Ritzia, and he's already killed her. He challenges him with what he'd do next, comparing Keldric's violent nature to his own as his brother. As Stroud fades away, Ritzia suddenly reappears, saying that Stroud could never kill her with that imperfect blade. As Keldric pleads with Ritzia, she reveals that Ritzia is no more, and her plot will now move forward with Stroud out of the way. Her plan to use all of the power within the Great Tree to free the echoes of destruction continues on. She disappears, and Keldric presses further in to stop the new foe, Anise, the tree maiden from 1,000 years ago, who now possesses Ritzia's body. Reaching the end of the road, Keldric finds Ritzia's pet rabbit, Buju. He knows that she's close. Anise appears. She reveals that she needs the seed from Keldric and the aid of Fae to completely release the echoes and make the world like that of Mavolia, and truly plunge it into darkness. She relays that she'd been puppeteering Ritzia all along, using Ritzia's desire to revive the great mana tree to her advantage. This is how she convinced Ritzia to open the door to Mavolia. She adds that in order to revive the great tree, the keeper of the seed must become one with the liberator of echoes, by piercing her through with his sword. She asks him, will he help her release the echoes, or will he destroy them and kill Ritzia in the process? An impossibly difficult choice for Keldric. He has done everything he's done now, not to save the world, but to save his love. Now he must choose between having to save her and saving the world. She mutates further into Medusa and engages in combat in the final confrontation to decide the fate of the world. Light and darkness hang in the balance. After an enduring and strenuous battle, Keldric stands victorious. Keldric struggles to deliver the final blow, unable to kill the woman he fought so hard for. Fae urges him to finish what he came to do, saying they'll always be with him. Just then, Anise rises, but Keldric, awash with power and a new feeling of determination, moves in for the final strike.
Ritzia, you know I'm sorry. I wish I could save you, but I have no choice!
And like that, he kills the love of his life. Anise is reunited with Grans, the masked guru, in the afterlife. As for Ritzia, she takes the seed from Keldric, becoming one with it and Fae, and becomes the mana goddess, giving life to the mana tree, and shines light again out onto the world. She releases the elemental spirits out into the world in plenty, and the world begins to heal from the scars of Thanatos. The mana goddess, having spread mana into all parts of the world, forms the mana sword and leaves it to rest beneath the tree. The Epilogue. It would be revealed that the reason the elementals are discussing this story is because it is a thousands-year-old tale, but the mana of the world dwindles again. With the mana goddess's spirit diminished, the mana tree has withered, and the mana sword missing. They'll need a hero once again to combat the stirring shadows. The elementals all agree to help the great tree maiden and find the new mana warrior. Back in Keldrick's time, Keldrick reminisces on all that happens, his simple life, and how it all changed. He leaves his village behind to forge his own destiny. And that is the story of Dawn of Mana. So, let's start with the Solace, or the good. The voice acting, actually pretty good. One thing that would actually make me sad is if they were to remake this game to the capacity that they should, they would need to have new lines recorded, and we would lose some of those original performances. With the exception of some of the elementals, I really loved what they did with their performances, and it kind of helps draw you in. Another great point is there are some incredibly well done cutscenes, and it brings to life the scale of the action in a way that most of the mana games don't. Particularly the war scene, where Stroud's forces attack the village. Beyond that, also the music of the cutscenes tend to lend a level of emotion that I didn't fully anticipate. They did really well with the score, even if a lot of the songs are just reused from other games. The story sets up the mythos of the world of Mana, which makes an otherwise completely disconnected franchise feel connected, giving promise to something greater that would honestly never be delivered on. And lastly, the story actually has stakes and does not shy away from tragedy. Keldrick kills everybody. He kills his best friend, he kills his brother, he kills the love of his life. Also, the bad guy wins and rules the world because you failed. This is without a doubt my favorite part of the story. As, you know, the moral conflict of having to execute the most important people of your life is something that I've talked about often that's appeared in other games. I don't have the strength to do that. If it's between my wife and the world, by world. But, you know, there are some problems with this part, and this is where we get into the dread, or the bad. The biggest issue that this game suffers from in a narrative sense is that there's no chance to watch or experience the bond between the characters, or develop a love for the home that gets destroyed and captured, and all the major plot points happen in this village and you never even get to see it. You never get to know the townsfolk or have a chance to see the bond develop between Keldrick and Lekius, or the Elder, or even Ritzia to some degree. It's all just told to you, or you have to get it between the lines. Furthermore, the other nations, they mention them and they do get involved, but because you're playing in such a linear manner, you really have no sense of the scale of the world. And the major pieces of the narrative are told in an exposition dump in a series of sepia still frames that take up like 30% of the screen. How is anyone going to remember this extremely important plot point when this is how you're telling it? This is legitimately the worst way to tell a story in a game, bar none. And it's explaining huge stuff that matters. We need cutscenes acting this stuff out at the very least. The budget may not have allowed for this, but it really hurt the story that they were trying to tell. Also, the plot gets a little convoluted in the second half. The echoes of Mavolia, the Thanatos, the Mavol, the Grimsleys, a lot of it could just be simplified into a malevolent force and the spirits born from the malevolent force. That's really all they needed to say. It made it very hard to follow. And there's also some very silly plot devices, like that literal random plot device that just magically made the Thanatos weaker at the top of some random tower. That's fucking silly. Ridiculous, even. Perhaps the last thing worth mentioning is the plot point of Keldrick being the brother of Stroud. It's not explored very well, and it's kind of a wasted plot point. It does explain how Keldrick ended up on the island, as Stroud threw him in the ocean to try to kill him as a baby, but there's nothing explored there. It's just wasted and feels unnecessary because of it. And sure, you could draw comparisons between Stroud's nature and Keldrick's, but that's really about it. Linking everything together, I hope with my entire fat heart that the sacrifices made in the story of Dawn of Mana is indicative of what we may get in Visions of Mana and beyond. I want there to be stakes. I want there to be loss, for characters to bond and die. Impact on the characters makes for a better story. It's that simple. The game is serviceable, but it needs a remake that adds exploration outside of the zones of the objective, particularly a map and a village and, something so you can see what's happening, not just telling the audience. But on that note, let's talk about the gameplay because, again, just like the story, great ideas, bad execution. The gameplay of Dawn of Mana is unique in that much of it relies on the panic system that was put in place, where you utilize the debris and items on the playing field and you hurl them at enemies, which stuns them or puts them in a panic. The harder and more often you hit them, the higher the stun count goes, and then the better the rewards are. This is very cool in concept, to a point that I wish some of that returned in Visions of Mana, albeit less integral to the gameplay experience, but still. The reason that you want to get the panic level higher is because the extra rewards you get are medals, and after accumulating enough of them, they can raise your HP, your attack, and your magic. This is how you get stronger, and this resets on every level. Every single level, you start over again. Call it personal preference, but I kind of like this part as well. If you did not have a need to fight the enemies, I fear the game would be too easy and too short. Enemies would be mostly skippable, and this system of needing to be leveled up before you get to a really hard boss fight, and the boss fights in this game can be brutal, it makes it much more essential to the gameplay to fight trash mobs. That's a decent gameplay loop. It is a little bit deflating, feeling weaker and losing all your rewards for getting stronger in the first place every single level, but I still prefer this to having no reason to fight massive amounts of enemies, since combat is really all there is to the gameplay. The combat itself, very basic. Aerial combat basically doesn't exist. And on the ground, you're either doing a 3-hit basic combo or 5-hit and physical attacks. And then you heal, cast some basic elemental spells, or you're just whipping rocks and trees at enemies. One of the cool factors is that elemental magic can combine with and alter things around you. So you can light wood on fire or change elemental properties of certain items depending on what it is. Super handy in boss fights. And the whip itself can be frustrating for a few reasons. One, it's not very intuitive on how you move when you're dragging something behind you. There's a spin feature on it that you can basically go the entire game without using because it's not very effective. And then there's the camera that's actively working against you while you're using it. And let's talk about that camera and the targeting. It's the single most frustrating part of the experience. There are two different targeting buttons, one that targets items and one that targets enemies. Where it will target is a fucking gamble when you push the button. So more often than not, I opted not to even use targeting because it was just easier to go without it. But even when you do target something, you use the right stick to flip between targets. However, this also rotates the camera. So even when you do try to target effectively, you'll find yourself turning away from the enemies. And the camera is also in so tight that it's difficult to see what's happening around you. A zoom out on some of these boss fights where there's attacks flying in every direction and traps on the ground and stuff, it would have made this much more enjoyable. The camera made this really difficult to play and enjoy. All of the frustration really stemmed from that camera. Controlling Keldrick in general, though, just didn't feel good, as his jumps felt kind of clunky, and he doesn't really move much once he's in the air, and it was wildly frustrating navigating some levels, especially in the air, and especially towards the end of the game. As far as the level design, I'm of a love-hate relationship with it. I love how big the areas felt most of the time, as each level is a giant sandbox that felt like you should and could explore it for at least the hidden elementals. But apart from that, there isn't really much of a reason to explore these needlessly large areas. And intermingled with this, much of the time to proceed through a level, you needed to find and kill a specific enemy, so they would drop a key so you could proceed to the next area. This was a bit frustrating sometimes as it felt kind of random, but the enemy was usually near the door you needed to get through. Just kill enough of them and you'd find them. And we can't forget about the battle arena, although the game would kind of like you to forget about the battle arena. This was a kind of challenge mode where you could kill enemies within a time limit, etc. It wasn't different enough from the story mode and gameplay, so it didn't really feel worth the effort of playing through it, even if all of the money that you get from the story mode feeds into it. This really doesn't add much to the game, but it was there. There was also a shop in there. The shop allowed you to buy emblems for use during the story, but unless you went exploring into it, you would never know that. I actually finished the entire game before I knew that I could use and purchase emblems in my gameplay. They never tutorialize you into going in there. Another indicator for the extreme lack of direction that this game gives you. Despite this, I was charmed in continuing to play this. It's like a sexy train wreck. That's the best I got. All of this amounts to a very mediocre action game with some cool quirks. This is the textbook definition of aged very badly. Just like the story, they do have potential to do something really fun and kind of unique. Most of the Mana games are playable as is and don't need remakes. Secret of Mana is just as playable in its original state. Same for Trials of Mana. That's the difference between this and the others. Porting this game, as it is, to modern consoles would be a crime. There's things that are functionally broken and unacceptable by today's standard in gaming. This is not to say anything for the lack of direction in the game and the terrible minimap. I can't explain it. I loved my time in this game, but I'd be lying if I said anything other than it being a half-baked and broken mess that just happened to use quality ingredients. No, that actually explains it quite well. It's exactly that. This is why I say this game is in need of a remake more than any other game I've ever played, ever. Strong narrative, badly told. Cool gameplay mechanics mixed with boring ones and a bad camera to boot. Everything in me wants to shift blame to their World of Mana project, as I fear their resources were too widely spread. But it's too difficult to confirm this. By the way, the World of Mana project was when they took a shotgun of half-baked games and different genres and tried to grow and revitalize the Mana brand, and it blew up in their face. It's difficult to confirm that that was the reason that this game did not come out well, but seeing that 4 different Mana titles came out in like a year, it's safe to say that oversight was just kind of fragmented. I know people don't love Dawn of Mana, but saying it's outright bad feels like we're just selling it a bit short. It has potential, and I hope that Koichi decides to go back and address his mistake here someday. Or, you know, he could also go and remake Seiken Densetsu 1 for the 5th time. You know, one of the two will happen. Anyway, that's it from me. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon. And long live the Turtle Kingdom. Where there is mana, there is love. Where there is love, there is mana.